Hey guys, Kion here, and welcome to your third Basic C tutorial. So, in the first tutorial, we set up our environment. In our second tutorial, we went over some basic concepts. And in the third tutorial, which is this one, we're going to start getting into some basic programming syntax. So, we're going to start off this tutorial by just making a file called else.c, and we'll start with sharp include std.io.h int main, and then we will make a variable int score equals 65, and then quick test printf your score was %d line break, and then score. And then over here we're gonna compile, and then right, so your score is 65. Okay, everything's good, but this program is not very effective or not very useful. It just says your score is 65. So let's have our program do different things based on what we put into it. So if the score was less than 50, we can say printf you need to do better /n, else if your score was less than 75, printf pretty good. We'll spell good wrong. Pretty good /n, and then otherwise print f you did great. Okay, now we can compile, run. Your score is 65, pretty good. So you might be thinking, hey Kion, why didn't you do score is less than 50, score is greater than 50, and score is less than 75, otherwise greater than 75? Well, the thing is, if you go through if else, if the first one that evaluates the true will print. So if you order your if else statements in a sequence where you catch each condition, so we don't then you can avoid doing that. So when you first start programming, it's good to always make your conditions as explicit as possible. But otherwise, as you go along, you just keep in mind that there are ways to make things simple. And with if else, if the first condition that holds true will be evaluated. So we can add another aspect to this of int time equals 1115, and we'll just pretend this is the number of seconds it takes. So one thing that people often do when programming is if score is greater than 50, printf pass, printf fail, if time is greater than 120, printf good time, else printf bad time. File and run it. Pass bad time. But this is generally not a really good program. One thing to watch out for is if you always do your when you first get into programming, it's really tempting to always test the correct score points first. If yes, then do this. If yeah, otherwise then do this. But what happens is you start nesting and get a lot of really ugly code, So what you can rewrite this code to is if score is less than 50, printf not a good enough score. If time is greater than 100 or something like that, printf your time was too slow. Printf oh, forgot. So if you do it this way, your score is 65, your time was too slow, then you can look, if your mission or whatever has two conditions, you can check one condition. If one condition isn't met, stop. If you check another condition, the other condition isn't met, stop, and then you can continue um, on the assumption that you've checked all the errors that could possibly happen, and then from there you know that um, okay, uh, you're um, you're only testing positive conditions. So basically for if else, there's not much else beyond this. Pretty much just if there's examples in books, go through the examples, type them out, compile and run them, and make sure you're familiar with them. This is mostly for style things just to keep in mind, because there are, while it is pretty simple for if else statements, there are a lot of bad things you can do, and one of the easiest traps to fall into is testing positive conditions first and having a lot of if else statements where your code keeps getting more and more indented, and you have lots and lots of errors that come up at the bottom, and if you write it like this, it becomes stupidly easy to kind of read your code afterwards. But that's just a general suggestion. Don't really care about what Kion says. Kion says do it this way. No, what matters is whatever works for you. But this is just a kind of a general suggestion to keep in mind for simplifying your code, to keep it easy to read. Because again, there isn't too much in terms of if-else statements. It's pretty self-explanatory. So this is just extra padding. The other thing is switch score. So switch is not something that you're generally gonna use too often in most programming cases. In programming, for most of the well, what switch does, it will look at if, say you have a situation if score equals 5, else if score equals 4, else if score equals 3, and so on. This is a pretty redundant code. If you're looking to check score against a specific value, you can write a bunch of if-else statements, or you can write one switch statement, and so you can just say score case 5 printf a plus case 4 printf b break case 3 printf c break case 2 printf d break case 1 printf f, and then break. So if we can compile this, run it, we have a plus. I didn't put a line break in there, but where'd it go? Yeah, a plus. I didn't put a line break, so it's just gonna be there. One quick thing to mention about scores is it'll evaluate. It'll say, hey, check score, and then look at the case, and then the number next to the case, and then it'll evaluate everything down until break. So this is not common, but you can do. Something like this, where you have printf a. Oh wait, that's not going to work. I'm trying to think. What was originally I was gonna do for this? Think, Kion, think. Oh, all right. So there we go. I remember what I was gonna do. Great job. So when we have score 5 here and it says checks case 5, great job. Check mission, and then mission complete. So it evaluates down until the breakpoint. And so the only, this isn't a very common use or a use I would suggest very often. Specifically, the reason I'm introducing it is because for things like PNG files, PNG files have different formats in which the PNG file is encoded in, and so sometimes it'll have a number at the beginning of the file that tells you if it's compressed or not. So if it's like 5, here you do the decompression, and then case 4, read RGBA values. So sometimes files and different things will be encoded like this, where you do the decompression and then you read the RGBA files after they've been decompressed, and if it's 4, you just read the RGBA files directly. This, again, something you're not going to be using pretty often, but just in terms of syntax, this is one quirk that the switch statement has that kind of that can be used to different effects. And then default break will be read RGB value. So in this case, if it's a 5, there's decompress, do the decompression, read RGBA files. Otherwise, if any other number besides 5 or 4 comes in, then it's just a standard RGB image or something to that effect. But this is just to give you a quick introduction to if else and the switch statement, and how you kind of learn and to get you introduced to making different conditions, or getting your program to catch and manage different conditions. But like I said again, just go through the book or any C examples you see, just type them in, compile them, make sure you're mostly familiar with the concepts, and otherwise it's pretty self-explanatory. So this is the end of this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one.